And we are back in Skyrim today. More specifically, we are heading to the Hold of the Rift. Skyrim is full of little details that paint pictures of stories and adventures the player is only able to find the aftermath of, and today we are heading to the Rift to find just 5 of these stories. If you enjoy this style of content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so I know to make more of it. Our first stop is just southeast of Iverstead to a small camp tucked away near the river. At first glance, this camp is like any other you'd find in your travels. That is, until you look closer. Furniture is knocked over, food is spilled across the ground, and blood soaks into the firewood. And on a nearby stump, we find the corpse of the camp's owner. Hi, editing Snowfall here. So, in between recording this and gathering the footage, the corpse seems to have disappeared. That isn't meant to happen. I think my game is haunted. But what killed him? A thief? A Dark Brotherhood assassin? Well, given the juicy coin purse left in the tent, that seems unlikely, and given the abundance of food and the uneaten state of his corpse, it also seems unlikely an animal would have done it. So just who is responsible? A mystery for another time, perhaps. To the south of the rift now, our next destination is just south of Froki's shack. Here we find a statue of Talos hidden away in the mountains, but more interestingly, at the foot of this statue are the armaments of a legionnaire. Armaments of those who, according to the White Gold Concordat, must enforce the ban on the worship of Talos. Clearly, this individual could not stomach turning against his god, and laid down his weapon here, forsaking his previous allegiance. Interestingly, despite what is being shown on screen, the helmet is usually one of the closed-faced Imperial helmets. I'm using NordWarUA's Authentic Legion replacer here. But, being that there are, and correct me if I'm wrong, only 2 of these specific helmets in Skyrim, it stands to reason that this was quite the decorated soldier. Perhaps in your travels you've been to Darkwater Pass. Perhaps you've gone through and emerged into the scenic exit area. But here lies a dark secret. Take the plunge into the water, and you will find quite the sight. A skeleton, his armaments, his bag, and a block tied to his leg. And that is just one leg. If we clip under the ground, we can see the extra rope from the block, the extra stairs nearby, and even the bottom of the boots his one foot is wearing. This means he was very purposefully designed this way, to have only one leg. Whatever this guy did, he really pissed off the Skyrim Mafia. And given where we are, my money is on the Blackbriars. Our next stop is Broken Helm Hollow, more specifically, the waterfall next to it. Hidden in the mists below, we find a trail of septims. If we follow this trail, we find an iron sword, and heading further down, we can find the owner, a Khajiit, with his final few remaining coins. Clearly, the bandits of Broken Helm Hollow don't take too kindly to this Khajiit stumbling across their hideout. And now, my personal favorite. This one is found just past the river south of Geirmund's Hall. Here we find a novice necromancer. He is surrounded by 3 dead chickens and praying to some kind of bone cairn, which is adorned with a nest and a chicken's egg. Upon approaching, he will summon his army of feathered friends from the dead and engage in combat, and the egg will vanish. I have no idea why he does this, but to his credit, it does seem to have worked. For our first find, we need to head out of the beautiful forests and to the border between Whiterun and Falkreath. Here we find a most peculiar sight. A horse and cart, a fair distance away from each other, have met with a grisly fate. The cart is toppled over and the merchant and horse lie dead. The cart has been plundered, all of the valuables taken, and only a collection of pans and a few other household trinkets remain. But this seemingly simple, if tragic, robbery is not without mystery. Bear traps are laid out. These traps were clearly not used in the robbery, so why are they here? Perhaps part of the plan went wrong. Perhaps they were just cargo the bandits deemed too dangerous. Whatever the case, be sure to watch your step. Moving back into the forests now, we come across a statue of Talos, and below we find a grim scene. Bodies lay strewn across the grass, blood soaking into the mud. None of us need any evidence to know who is responsible for this. However, lying along with his victims is a Thalmor agent. On his corpse we can find a note explaining his presence. It seems even within the Dominion, this agent was not viewed kindly. Unfortunately, however, it would seem that this time his information was, in fact, correct. And despite being fatally injured as he did so, he slaughtered the worshippers here. Further north now, we find another poor soul. This time a Dunmer lying next to a stone cairn, blood splattered across it. An interesting note is that whilst this is a dark elf, he has suspiciously light skin, as if his blood was sucked out of him, which is likely exactly what happened, as this is found just up the road from Half Moon Mill, which, as we learn from contracts in the Dark Brotherhood, is home to 2 vampires. This unfortunate soul was likely just another meal for these 2 creatures of the night. Heading into the mountains now, we find an interesting sight indeed. A skeleton missing both of its arms and its head, with an axe embedded in the tree just above its neck. Next to the skeleton lies an unlooted chest, suggesting that this person was not robbed by bandits, and he clearly did not succumb to the wildlife or the elements. Perhaps this was a crime of passion, or perhaps, given the conjuration skill book found next to the chest, a summons gone wrong. We will never know, but one thing is for sure. The wilds of Falkreath are dangerous indeed. Returning to the forests once again, we have our 5th and final find. We enter into a misty clearing, presided over by a necromancer. Once he is slain, we can take a look around. An altar lies in the center, blood clinging to every surface and topped with poison, bones, and this necromancer's latest victim, an imperial woman. No doubt the world is a better place now that we've removed this. Beginning our journey in the eastern tundra plains the hold of Whiterun is famous for, we stumble upon a dried up pond with some mud crabs. Nothing out of the ordinary here? Well, stop to take a look and you will find the remains of a giant mud crab. Maybe this is the one they were talking about when they said they'd fought mud crabs fiercer than you. Of course, those of you familiar with the lore we'll know that giant mud crabs, far larger than this one, used to roam the wilds of Vardenfell in the neighbouring land of Morrowind, and were known as Emperor crabs. Perhaps the remains here are the last struggling remnants of these mighty crustaceans. Or perhaps not so struggling. If we look around the pond, we can find many human remains. Perhaps these mud crabs truly are fierce. Moving further west now, we can find a group of dead trees huddled closely together. Upon approaching the center of these trees, we will find a strongbox, an arm, and a splattering of blood. The strongbox will be unlooted and filled with gemstones. Whoever lost this clearly was not robbed. Perhaps he or she was out looking for a place to hide their valuables, and was viciously attacked by a wolf or another deadly creature. Perhaps even multiple, ripping off the arm and dragging the body away to be eaten in safety. Whatever happened, this poor soul's valuables will surely serve us better now that they have no need of them. Continuing our theme of deadly animals, if you explore Whiterun, you will often find the skeletons of mammoths. One in particular, however, is different from the rest. Heading north from Sleeping Tree Camp, we will find this skeleton, and if you take a closer look, you will find within its ribcage a humanoid skeleton. Did this mammoth swallow this person whole? Well, that seems unlikely. Mammoths aren't exactly known for munching on humans. Perhaps this person, stuck out in the cold tundra, decided to pull a Han Solo and climb inside a dead mammoth for warmth, in a futile effort to survive. Either way, it is truly an interesting sight to behold. Heading south now, we find an ancient Nordic ruin, one you are quite likely to have found yourself. The ruin contains the classic spinning animal totem puzzle, the combination being eagle, whale, snake as shown here. Once the trapdoor has been unlocked, we can head down and get a destruction skill book, which is lovely. What is less lovely is the skeleton found next to the chest. Given the crumbled nature of the ruin, I think this would be a more recent arrival, perhaps lured in by the promise of treasure, and then betrayed at the last second as their evil counterpart spanned the totems and locked them inside. Better keep the location of this one a secret from Sven and Feindal. Further north now, on a small island sitting in a river, is our fifth and final discovery. And of course, we're back to mud crabs. The island contains even further evidence of the dangers of these crustaceans, as we find a skull and spine of a human or elf, and even the skeletal remains of a mammoth. A coincidence, perhaps? Or perhaps we've been overlooking the biggest threat to Skyrim we've ever seen. I'd certainly start keeping an eye on these mud crabs if I were you. Be careful out there. For our first discovery, we're traveling to the border of the Pale and Eastmarch to find what is an absolute classic of game design. Following along the river, we end up at a campsite. But for once, we actually know whose it is. We kill them in the Dark Brotherhood questline after all. But the camp isn't what we're here for, no. Did my clue give it away? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, they actually put loot behind the waterfall. But the really interesting part is the skeleton. How did someone end up dying here? They wouldn't have been carried by the current it's heading away. They must have died in the cave. Perhaps the allure of treasure was their end. Perhaps They were killed to protect the treasure or silence anyone who knew of its location. Whatever the reason, it's ours now. This next one is strange. If you head just east of Frostmere Crypt, in the distance you may notice something. A ruined book. Just one ruined book, alone in the snow. Why is it here? Is it signaling the remains of a lost wizard or merchant? It really isn't clear. This book was placed here by someone at Bethesda, but why? Are there deep lore implications that we will only know further down the line? Is it symbolic of the ruined nature of the Empire? Or was it just to mark the location of Dim Hollow Crypt for when they added it into the game? Sadly, we may never know. For our third discovery, we have a sad sight indeed. On the border between Whiterun and the Pale, we find an area filled with the remains of mammoths. Clearly, this is an area used by giants as some kind of graveyard. They are clearly very protective of their tusked friends. It may be that the giants actually bring them here to skin and eat them, but given the lack of giants here and the fresh mammoth corpse, it would seem this place is indeed a graveyard. Perhaps a place for the favourite of the herd. Either way, we should leave these bones to rest. For our next find, we have yet another mystery. Placed atop some ruins are what appear to be offerings of some kind. But offerings to who? Well, the ruins are Nordic, so perhaps it's either to the old totemic gods of the Antmorans or the ancient Nordic pantheon. However, based on its location, it may serve a darker purpose, as not too far away we have the Shrine of Mehrunes Dagon. Perhaps his worshippers came here to be more discreet, or perhaps in an attempt to avoid their lord's wrath. Unfortunately, this is all just speculation. There really isn't any proof for any of these, given the randomness of the items found. Another mystery, its answer lost to the snowy expanses of the Pale. Our final find is potentially nicer. Along the coast, just to the northeast of Dawnstar itself, we find a lone tent. Peering within, we can take a pretty good guess as to what was going on here. The tent is strewn with flowers, wine, goblets, and clothing. We even find an amulet of Mara. The love on display is a truly heartwarming sight in such a cold and dangerous land. However, I seem to remember finding, just up the road, some bodies that most likely came from this very tent, which would be a tragic end to this tale. But I can't seem to find them. I may have just been imagining it. If you have any answers for this particular quandary, do let me know in the comments. Let's hope for their sake my memory was just playing tricks on me. Now, for this one, we have a bonus. How could we not include such a staple of the city of Dawnstar after all? That's right, it may not be quite the type of thing we look at in this series, but I just had to give a nod to the Khajiit merchant chest hidden under the ground. Enjoy your free loot, folks. For our first find, where better to start than the most reviled of the Reach's residents? The unmarked camp of a Hagraven. If you needed any more proof of their evil, you need look no further. A series of spikes protrude from the ground, sporting the bloodied heads of their kills, surrounding the altar at which they practice their dark magics. And speaking of this altar, here we find all the evidence we need for their foul deeds. A human hand, no doubt belonging to the poor victim of this soulless beast. And speaking of the beast itself, once you've spent long enough here, she will return home. Best be in for a fight. Our next discovery is unfortunately a tragic one. Here we find a tent, 2 bottles of wine, 2 cups, and a single bedroll. Clearly, 2 people were out here having a good time. Unfortunately, if we take a peek outside, we find them, as well as their attacker. Unfortunately, it seems we were just too late, as both have been slain. So I wrote this part of the script, and then I went to get the footage, and they're just kinda not here anymore. So that's weird. And I guess the bear got hungry. Anyway, from the information we find in a nearby journal, as well as the 2 silver rings that are supposed to be on their corpses, we can assume they were engaged. Truly a tragic loss. But there is a hollowed out tree stump nearby with loot in it, so that's pretty sick. And now, for the first time in this series, we're heading into the capital of the Hold to find what is quite possibly the most significant archaeological find in recent Tamrielic memory. When you escape from the Dwemer Keep turned laboratory in the Thieves Guild questline just before Enthir says the funny line, you leap from this waterfall. However, if you were to delve below the waters and take a look, you'll come across 2 skeletons. And whilst it is entirely possible these are the victims of the local cannibals, gangs, corrupt guards, or some other kind of tragic death, it is equally possible that these are in fact the remains of Dwemer. Markarth is a dwarven city, after all. Perhaps the relentless flow of water has brought these 2 into the light once again. Unfortunately, we will likely never know. Next up, we have a sight all too common in the dangerous land of Skyrim. An orc rests upon a chest of valuables, struck down whilst defending himself from the vicious wildlife, quite successfully too, it seems. So what did kill him? Well, if we look not too far away, we find an even more fearsome predator, a bear. A rampaging, bloodied orc would likely be seen as a threat to such a creature, but it would seem after tiring himself out on the wolves, he wasn't quite enough of a threat. The bear, of course, did simply kill him for food because, well, he's still here. This seems far more territorial to me. But anyway, let's steal his stuff and sneak away before it sees us too. Now for our final find. Just down the rocky hillside from Skyhaven Temple, we find a most peculiar sight indeed. A boat lies crashed against the shore, and within it we find a plethora of gemstones, as well as a strong box containing even more of them. If you're wondering how they crashed, the answer can be found in the water below. Barrels filled with mead. Don't drink and sail, kids. It would seem the owners of these gems must have perished in the crash. Why else would they leave all this behind? They must have been washed away by the current or devoured by the wildlife. Another mystery to add to the list, but this time a most profitable one indeed. For our first find, let's focus on those ancient ruins, dwarven ruins to be exact. If we head to the ruins of Mzulft during the College of Winterhold questline, we will end up exiting the ruins here. However, if you were to head above these ruins, which realistically most people never would, we can see the roof of this nearby tower looks very much like the Dwemer mechanisms we have to interact with to do things like gaining access to Elder Scrolls. Interestingly, on this side of the roof, we see bright blue gemstones embedded into the stonework. This would most likely be Ethereum. Perhaps much like the aliens of Cyrodiil, the Dwemer used starlight for power, and the Ethereum accomplished the same goal. It would certainly make sense for such a complex system. But what is in this tower? Does it connect to the mapping room we were interacting with during the College of Winterhold questline? Or is there another, more powerful artifact still hidden away in this cold Dwemer tomb? Our next find is a tragic one, and perhaps slightly better known. Along the coast of the hot spring-laden tundra, we find a single giant. A giant sadly gazing down at a fallen friend. This giant will not be hostile, but due to the nature of simply being a giant, many seem to avoid this area altogether and miss this really touching moment between a man and his pet. Let's move on and leave them to be together. Further into the waters, we can find a small fortress, or what's left of one. As we approach, skeletons will rise from the dead, ready to defend their lost keep. We see swords thrust into the dirt surrounding a necromantic altar. Now, this is only here thanks to Anniversary Edition. Normally, this ruin is empty aside from skeletons. But just what happened here? From the ruins we see, it looks like this fort was utterly obliterated by something. A nearby dragon or civil war, perhaps? Unlikely. The ruins look far too old. Perhaps the volcanic waters below erupted and tore it apart. Perhaps it was simply an unfortunate casualty in an old war. We may never know, but it does truly demonstrate the dangers of living in such a hostile land. Next up, we have a very strange sight indeed. We come across what seems to be a small fishing shack. However, tragedy has struck. We find a tree crashed through the roof and a man, rather unfortunately named Lucky Lorenz, flattened beneath it. Except in my game, for some reason, he fell through the floor and now he's in the water, but don't worry about that. We can only assume he was sitting and reading his fine literature when this horrific accident occurred. You really have to wonder how he got his nickname. Finally, we head into Windhelm itself to find a very mysterious and ancient wall. No, not this one. What even is that? A low res accounting of the 500 companions? No, we want this wall. This wall has a very interesting secret. When struck, this wall will bleed. Why? Is it a bug? Probably. Or maybe Windhelm has a secret far darker than something like the Butcher. Or it's just a bug, but it's a real weird one, so I figured I'd include it here either way. Our first discovery seems unremarkable at first. A classic set of ruins with some plants and insects around. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? Well, if we take a closer look at these flowers and butterflies, we can see that they consist of only nightshade and torch bugs specifically. The two can't be combined together for a potions, so that theory is out, but we know that nightshade only grows around the dead, meaning that this was likely a burial ground. Perhaps the deadly nature of this nightshade keeps the nectar-loving butterflies at bay, making way for the torch bug swarms. Our next find is almost the opposite of the last. Here we have a grove beside a mountain. Typical ruins with flowers and butterflies, and a set of stairs that appear to go off into nothingness. This place is worthy of note because of just how unremarkable it truly is. The ruins don't seem to mean anything. The stairs go nowhere. The flora and fauna is as typical as they come. The place simply shouldn't be. It's too benign. If you have any theories on this location, which can be found here, do leave them down below. Next up, atop a waterfall, we have our next find.
a single skull rests here. What strikes me about this is not only the strangeness of a random skull being here, but how purposefully placed it seems to be, as if it were the last request of a loved family member to have his skull staring out across the landscape of Skyrim. It would be a nice change from the clearly tossed and murdered bodies we tend to find so often in places such as this in this series. But not to stay in the land of nice for too long, we move on to our next find, a camp. The fire died out, sits amidst this tranquil area, but the contents of the camp are anything but. The two owners of the camp are here and in many bloody pieces. Something or someone came and tore these two apart. Given the lack of flesh, my guess is the local wildlife, but who knows what vile manner of beast or man could have come across them. Still, free restoration skill book. And speaking of beasts, here we have our final find. A bear sits by its dinner, an entire mammoth, its sides and neck slashed open violently. It's surprising a bear was able to take down such a formidable creature, but I'm sure it is feasting like a king for it. Interestingly, this isn't just a mammoth corpse. Well, it is, but this isn't your typical mammoth corpse that you would have from, killing a mammoth. This was placed here specifically. It's unique. You can't just fire off resurrect at it in the console and bring it back to life. Somebody at Bethesda wanted this bear to feast like a king. Well, that is the circle of life for you. And as such, we should leave them be. I'd say he's earned his meal.
Our first stop is really, really weird. Out on a rock in seemingly the middle of nowhere, we can find a Nirn root. Seems simple enough, you find that all the time. However, this isn't a naturally occurring Nirn root. This is the model from when Nirn root is placed after being harvested or dropped from a player's inventory. So, who came all the way out here to drop a Nirn root? Was someone out here over the carry weight limit and couldn't fast travel? We're unlikely to ever know, but this is an odd one indeed. Our next stop is atop the snowy mountains that tower over the hold. Here we can stumble across a very poor soul. Now, we've seen crimes of passion before in this series, but nothing quite as brutal as this. Not only was this person horrifically killed up here and impaled with an assortment of weapons, but the weapons were left inside them, and their belongings have not been stolen. Someone, or rather a group of someones, really didn't like whoever this was. Perhaps a group of Nords managed to corner a member of the Thalmor here. We are close to the embassy after all. Rather ironically, we find a light armor skill book beside him. I think I'll be sticking with the heavy armor skill tree from now on. Next up, we're heading back out to the islands, though this time to a much bigger one. Here we find, of course, once again, a skeleton clutching at a flag. Perhaps he was claiming this island as his own, although given his not alive nature, as well as the abundance of untapped resources around, mainly being gold ore veins, I think this may be some kind of final attempt at calling for help. Clearly something went horribly wrong here, but unfortunately we are once again too late to help. This next one is even stranger. We happen upon a camp. At first, this camp seems like any other, but if you, for whatever reason, really need clam meat, then this is the place to be. We find not only a box filled to the brim with clam meat, but just over near the water, we find a rock absolutely covered in unharvested clams. Now, we never see an owner of this camp, or indeed these clams, but I have a feeling I know exactly who this camp belongs to.
Superintendent Chalmers, welcome. I hope you're prepared for an unforgettable luncheon.
Now, for our final find, I just could not make a video about Solitude without mentioning all the weird and unexplained occurrences of random potions of healing you can find all over and around the place. There are some around the docks, some wedged between houses, some atop walls and in the grass, and just in the most obscure places. The easiest conclusion to draw would be that it has something to do with the Dark Brotherhood, given the elven arrows that can be found next to this potion in a fairly advantageous sniping position. But it can't have anything to do with your Dark Brotherhood contracts, as these are here before you can even enter Solitude for the first time. Clearly, someone was planning something here, but who and what, it seems, shall remain a mystery. We begin our journey, rather unsurprisingly for Winterhold, in the snow-covered mountains. Here we can stumble across an odd sight. A skeleton, a dwarven chest, and the skeleton of a deer. The chest is easy enough to explain. Clearly, it was from one of the nearby Dwemer ruins. Perhaps this skeleton belongs to a scholar or archaeologist, or even a raider of some kind. The deer, on the other hand, is very odd. Sure, these two could be here by coincidence, but obviously these assets were placed here very intentionally. Perhaps the deer was the cause of this poor soul's death. Perhaps it was a pet or charmed ally and they were killed by a predator. That would certainly explain the lack of meat on these bones, assuming they're not old enough to have simply decomposed, something that is even less likely in these sub-zero conditions. Either way, we're getting some free loot out of it. Next up, we have a far more obvious scene. We find ourselves looking at a cart and its owners, who have clearly been the victim of a rock slide or avalanche. The dangers of the mountains truly know no bounds. However, there is at least a small bit of silver lining here. There's a free enchanting skill book lying here just ready for the taking. Next up, we have an unassuming camp. At first, it appears as empty as all the rest of the camps around Skyrim tend to be. However, taking a peek inside one of the tents, we find a skeleton. Once again, most likely picked clean by the predators that call the mountain home. However, the real question remains: what happened to the owner of the second tent? Did he try and make his escape from the doomed camp? Did he perhaps leave after eliminating our friend here whilst up in the middle of nowhere? Another mystery to add to the collection. For our next find, we once again have a camp, and once again, this one has a far more definitive conclusion than the last. Taking a look around the camp, we find an assortment of items. Mead, wine, fishing nets, everything two friends would need for a great time on the water. And if the context clues weren't enough, we even have a journal describing the pair and their trip. Though it didn't seem to be going too well. Unfortunately for them, it would soon get much worse. If we cast our eyes across the water, we will spot an upturned boat, and of course, two skeletons. Taking a dive beneath the waves, we can see tankards littering the seafloor. Clearly, these two decided they couldn't wait until after the day's fishing for a drink, and it has cost them. not the first time I've had to remind you all not to drink and sail in this series. And finally, we have a classic. I'm sure many of you know about this one, but I just had to include it. And there were many like that, such as the Frozen Mammoth or the Island Full of Animals, but this one is special. We find here, in the bones of this mammoth, 2 spears. If you're confused as to why that's a big deal, spears hadn't been in the Elder Scrolls since Morrowind. The inclusion here is very interesting. The only other example I can think of are the Reichling spears, but those are just arrows to us. These are proper, full-sized spears. Whose they were are a mystery, and why they are here is a bigger one. Perhaps spears were once considered for Skyrim. But either way, these are all we have. First up, atop a large, jagged piece of icy rock, we find, shockingly, a skeleton. But this one has a few interesting features. Firstly, it has a snowberry bush growing out of it. Perhaps this fellow had been enjoying a nice fruity snack before his demise. However, in the hand of the skeleton, we find a ring. Clearly, this was very purposefully placed, but why? Why was this person raising this ring up? And how did they die like this? A most peculiar mystery indeed. And now from a mystery to a tragedy. Once again, we come across a skeleton, this one sitting next to some loot we may wish to plunder. He even has a lovely enchanted weapon laid across his lap for us. However, upon approach, we will discover exactly what led to this poor soul's death. An ice wraith will appear to do to us exactly what it had done to our friend here. Unfortunately for it though, we won't be going down quite as easily. Next up, we are taking a dive under the lake. This lake is full of little things to discover, skeletons, chests, all telling their own stories. There's the skeletons of those trying to escape the dragonfire, of people trying to save their valuables, of those same valuables leading to their demise, but what we are here to see is closer to the center of the lake. Here we can see just how fearsome the dragons who reside here really are. We find countless bones piled here. At least, I would assume these were due to the dragons. For all we know, the snow elves themselves used to dump bodies here, or perhaps a mighty battle once took place on this very spot. It's hard to say for sure, but given the incomplete nature of the skeletons we find, how haphazardly scattered they are, and the small area they are mostly contained in, it does lead me to more of an animalistic feeding area train of thought. Now, despite what I said earlier about skipping over the rest of the skeletons around the lake, there is one more I want to check out. Of course, most of these we can attribute to the dragons, or perhaps the wildlife, the farmer, or the cold weather. But this one is very different. We find 2 skeletons here. One holding fire resist potions, obviously to defend themselves from the dragon. However, the one next to it has a great sword plunged into its back. An elven great sword. This is what appears to be simple, cold-blooded murder. But why? Was our dragon-fearing friend here trying to sacrifice his fellow snow elf to the dragons to spare himself? Another mystery we may never have an answer to. And finally, we have a very small detail, but a very out-of-the-way one. Above a Falmer hut, in a place no one would really have any reason to go, is what appears to be some sort of altar. Not the strangest thing we've ever come across, but why the Falmer would create an altar to a troll, I have no idea. Perhaps this isn't religious and this is some sort of memorial to a friend or a pet or something. Maybe something similar to the Dunmer's ancestral worship practices. Another mystery, but certainly an interesting one to consider. Our first find is a very interesting one. We come across what is clearly some kind of gladiatorial arena, even complete with a viewing area and even what appears to be some kind of VIP seating. On the table is a book detailing events that occur around 2,000 years after the disappearance of the Dwemer, meaning this had to have been placed here by someone else, and given the blood we see in the center of the arena, it does seem like one way or another they made use of the facilities here. We even have a spinning blade for extra excitement. But the reason this is so strange is that there is no recorded evidence of the Dwemer ever involving themselves in these kind of barbaric sports. It's possible this was built to research the barbarism of their neighbor races, but throwing themselves needlessly into death sounds very illogical for such a logic-oriented race. If anything was done here, I would assume it was done to the Falmer. We know already the Dwemer had no reservations about using them as subjects in horrific experiments, but unfortunately it seems doubtful that we will ever get a true answer here. Continuing our look into Dwarven culture, our next find takes us up towards the cavern ceiling. Here we find what can only be a market stall. Once we've managed to lockpick our way inside, we can loot the contents at the back of the room, but opposite to that we have some kind of exchange area. What's interesting is that this isn't the only Dwemer ruin we find these counters in. This is very physical evidence that the Dwemer had an internal trading system and likely their own economic system too, which does make a lot of sense. We know from things like the Ethereum Wars that the various clans and colonies of the Dwemer did not always coexist with one another. It is very likely that monetary gain was a driving force for many of the Dwemer. For a society often seen as wise and intelligent beyond all others, it's certainly interesting to see that they too are no strangers to the baser sins of greed. Now, moving on to our third find, we continue our exploration of culture. At this time, it is of the Falmer. The Falmer becoming more intelligent is a concept that is explored a few times in Skyrim, and one I've always found very interesting. It actually reminds me a lot of the Tunnelers from Lonesome Road, which was always my favorite of the New Vegas DLCs, but I digress. We come across a set of huts, each with a farmer inside. But outside of those huts we see fish cooking, or perhaps just drying out, over a fire. Further up we also find pickaxes. This seems to suggest that the Falmer both know how to catch and cook fish as well as mine for ore. This information isn't exclusive to Blackreach, of course, but what I find interesting about it is that it seems sort of unnecessary here. They have an entire Dwemer fortress to live in. Why choose to stay in huts all the way out here? It's not like they couldn't just catch the fish and then take them back. Are they perhaps trying to get away from a grim reminder of their oppressors? Do they simply prefer their own architecture? Were they banished by the other Falmer? Or have these three simply been relegated to menial tasks? Given that the Falmer have slaves, much like the Dwemer, it would seem strange for that to be the case unless it were some kind of punishment, perhaps. Very strange indeed. But back to the Dwemer now. At the highest point of the central structure, we have a somewhat odd sight. A single chair looking out across the cavernous expanse before it. A Falmer seems to have claimed this area for his own, making it seem almost regal, like a throne. Whether this was once a throne or simply some kind of observation area is a mystery, but if we head around behind the tower we just emerged from, we can find one of the many crimson gnome roots. A strange place for a plant, and a strange place for a chair. Just a strange place all around. And finally, we have yet another culture to add to the list. We can stumble across a piece of stone down here. Shocking, I know, but this stone isn't Dwemer. It isn't even Falmer. It's Nordic. A piece of carved Nordic stone rests down here. Why? Was it a gift, a trophy? We do at least know the time period for these two races to have met around here lines up. But why would the Nords have just left a single pillar down here? The only explanation I can think of that has any sort of evidence is that perhaps it was brought down by a giant. We can of course find one down here, and it's the only real link there seems to be between all of these things, but it still doesn't tell us why. This is one hell of a mystery with no real explanation that makes much sense. But that's exactly the kind of thing we're here for. Oh, and a little bonus one. I'm sure everyone knows this one, but I just had to mention it. If you use the Unrelenting Force shout on the big orange glowy orb, the dragon Volthuriol will spawn, his name translating to Dark Overlord Fire. But for our first find, I'm going to cheat a little, because we've actually covered this one before in another video, but we can stumble upon this Reichling camp with a structure of some kind embedded in the snow. This structure is also clearly Dwemer, a fact even more obvious when looking inside, but something else you may notice is that this structure looks very boaty, nautical if you will. But given that we're in the middle of this rather large island, that seems rather odd, doesn't it? Well, this was actually a Dwemer airship, or at the very least, one patched together by some sorcerers in the Mages Guild, which was then subsequently crashed on an expedition to find a barrow of some kind. Though none of this information is found in Skyrim. It comes from Morrowind's Blood Moon DLC, which, if you're unaware, also took place on the island. And the same crashed airship can be found here, along with the captain's journal. You'd think someone would have taken an interest in this thing in the hundreds of years it's been here, but I guess it's only us for now. But of course, we have up next a skeleton. A skeleton, somewhat oddly, next to 3 apothecary satchels. Now call me crazy, but I think this person may have been an apothecary. But it's not the skeleton or its belongings that are so strange here, it's the location. This skeleton is found in a location no one, including the player, would ever have any reason to be. The jagged cliffs next to a waterfall aren't exactly the best place to make camp, and there aren't any kinds of alchemical ingredients or even ore veins to be gathered here. So the only conclusion left to draw is that they fell or were perhaps pushed. Given they still had their belongings, I would assume they either fell or were pushed off by an animal rather than thrown, but we've certainly seen crimes of passion before here, so murder is always an option too. Either way, I think we can all agree that this is one unfortunate soul. But moving on, we have something far more recent, and arguably far more unfortunate. We find a mining camp, and a quite prosperous one at that. We find an abundance of emerald geodes and gold deposits, a dream come true for many an aspiring prospector. But heading into the camp to find the lucky fellow, what we actually find is a very unlucky fellow. We find a man crushed by his own cart of rocks and gold. He hit the big time, and it would seem the big time hit back. But this seems a strange accident to get into, especially for an experienced miner such as this. Well, once again, we have the devil's drink to blame for untimely death in this series. Yes, crushed along with the man, and indeed spread throughout the camp, we find bottles of mead. Perhaps he was simply celebrating too soon. Don't drink and mine. Next up, we're heading to the ashy southern plains to find a bloodbath, albeit a very contained bloodbath. Here we find a collection of skeletons, blood, a body, and a chest. As we approach it, it will become clear what left them here. An ash spawn. Who would have thought? But this is quite interesting to observe. If the ash spawn are smart enough to create lures and traps like these, then perhaps they are becoming more intelligent, much like the Falmer we discussed in previous episodes. However, I think the more likely explanation is that this chest was left here for some other reason, and the ash spawn just see people approach and kill them. If it was an intentionally placed trap, you'd think they'd at least clean up the bodies. But then again, it must have worked despite the bodies being here for at least some of these people. And finally, we have high atop a waterfall, a fittingly mysterious and yet unremarkable find. A chest rests here, containing the typical randomized contents, of course. But next to the chest, we find a plain old sword and helmet. This pretty clearly shows that whoever left these items here did so intentionally. They brought this chest of random things all the way up to this hidden crevice, laid down their arms and armor, and simply left. But why? Were they becoming a monk and getting rid of all their personal possessions? It's impossible to say for sure, but we'll certainly put them to much better use. Oh, and another bonus one this week. If you come to just outside of Hrothmund's barrow and fly high up into the air, you can see these stones placed in the shape of a big pig, which is quite cute. For our first find, we turn our attention to one of the huge Sol geysers. We see huddled around it like a camp, orcs. Now, it's fairly obvious as to what happened here. These orcs were slain by someone using some kind of soul trap ability, right? That is how people end up here after all, doomed to exist in what the ideal masters who rule this place believe to be a paradise. But it's not that simple. A little ways away we can find a dragon skeleton, and this one is riddled with orcish arrows, and even has an orcish battle axe struck deep into its skull. Clearly the orcs were fighting the dragon, but how did its corporeal skeleton, along with their corporeal weapons, get here? Dragon skeletons being here is a mystery in itself. Perhaps they were brought here many years ago by Durnavir. They certainly must have been in the presence of a powerful necromancer at the very least. Of course, the Soul Cairn also seems to have an element of things just wash up here. But regardless, this is likely another mystery lost to time. Now, you know what we have up next. If you've watched enough of these, then say it with me. It's a skeleton. An ancient Nordic skeleton, it would seem. Along with his helmet and greatsword, which is of course randomly scaled to the player's level, we find a note.
They warned me not to go through that portal. What did I have to be scared of? I've been adventuring for years and I ain't never seen nothing I couldn't wallop. But this place, ain't nothing living here. Just dead things up and about when they should be in the ground. I can hear their bones scratching over the rocks, knocking together when they walk. If I get home, I'll hang up my sword and never go out again.
Unfortunately, it would seem he did not get back home. But this note brings up all kinds of questions. What portal was he talking about? How did someone construct it? Why? And perhaps most impressively, how did he survive here at all? Mortals can't enter the Soul Cairn, not even us, without getting partly soul-trapped or becoming a vampire. This was certainly one hell of an adventure. Next up, we have something odd. We come to a structure. The first thing we'll notice is there's a staircase here that leads to nothing. But that's actually quite common in the Soul Cairn, so we'll ignore that for now. However, moving on, we see that the entrance to this structure is blocked by bars. To access it, we need to head around the back and shoot the glowing orbs, as with all of the other barred off areas of the Soul Cairn. Once we've put in the extra work to access this area of the Soul Cairn, we are finally rewarded with nothing. There is literally nothing here. This could not be more disappointing. Perhaps the staircase we saw at the start was foreshadowing all along. Next up, we also sort of have nothing, though this nothing is in fact something. It just might as well not be anything. Within the walls of the boneyard presided over by the dragon Durnavir, you may have spotted a couple of chests high above on the rooftops. If you have, you've probably immediately forgotten about them, as this is where a bunch of plot happens, and it's a good thing that you did. There is actually no way to access these chests. Not a staircase, nor rubble, nor teleporter can bring you to this item. The Soul Cairn just loves to be filled with disappointments, it seems. But speaking of teleporters, we do need to take one to find our final discovery. When we do get transported high above, we will see what appears to be some kind of mage's campsite. We find potions and even a scroll of Storm Thrall, which I can't remember seeing anywhere else in the game, though correct me if I'm wrong on that. Either way, it is a powerful find. But moving back over to the body, we find a staff here, further tying this person to the arcane, but more conclusively, we find a dragon priest dagger. One of the ancients of the dragon cult had made their way to the Soul Cairn. Perhaps it was even he who opened the portal our ancient Nord friend told us about earlier. As for why he is here, perhaps he was in search of Durnavir, or simply hungry for more power. We can't say for sure, but I think it was likely good news for everyone that he was stopped here. Starting off, we have the first Black Book you are likely to come across, the Black Book, Waking Dreams. For our first discovery, we have something that was never meant to be discovered. Those of you who watched the previous video may find this familiar. Hopping over this wall near the end of the explorable area of Apocrypha, we can find two containers. Yes, much like the chests in the boneyard of the Soul Cairn, we can find two completely inaccessible chests. Why are these here? Was there ever a plan to be able to access these, or are we viewing the relics of game development? Perhaps this is where the Bloodborne remaster is. Perhaps Titanfall 3 is in here, or Silksong, perhaps. Unfortunately, it seems we will never know. But even closer to the end of this Black Book, we can find this. An apocryphal word wall. Of course, anyone who has played through this likely knows this was here, but there are some things to point out. Firstly, rather than being your traditional stone word wall, this one is written upon a giant scroll. It weirdly reminds me a lot of the Oblivion main menu, but regardless, this is, as I'm sure many of you know, one of the word walls for the dragon aspect shout. But the dragon language, or Dovazul, translates as follows. This stone commemorates Great Mirak, dragon priest of great wisdom, servant of the worm, and enemy of mankind. Well, at least we know we're definitely here to stop the bad guy. But moving on, we have the Black Book, The Hidden Twilight. First up is more or less just the entirety of Chapter 6. This area is, strangely, seemingly in a state of decay. The area is crumbling, the walls falling, and the usual fonts that would replenish us are unlit and inert. This area only functions as a holding space for entrance into the next two chapters. But what exactly happened here? It's unlike Mora to allow knowledge, no matter how trivial, to be lost, which means either he can't control what is happening in this room, or it's this way on purpose, perhaps as some kind of experiment. Another mystery to add to the collection.
Now, a very small detail for you, but you rare item enjoyers out there may find this one a little more interesting. At the very end of this black book, next to the power granting black book, we can find a scroll of paralyze. This is quite the rare find, as far as I am aware, there is only one other copy of this scroll that can be found beyond random loot and merchant stocks, and that copy is in the Dwemer Ruin of Mzulft. A small detail to be sure, but potentially a very powerful spell to have handy in the right situation. Next up for the Black Books is the Sallow Regent. You may have noticed during your time in Apocrypha these little floating light bulbs. These are known as wisp lanterns. Well, here in the Sallow Regent, not only are there a great many of them, but two stand out above the rest. Indeed, we can find not just one, but two of these giant variants, and giant they are, being even larger than the player's character model. Why these are here is an interesting question. Perhaps they are the progenitors of the other wisp lanterns we see all over Apocrypha, or merely a strange mutation. The latter seems more likely, as further into the book we can find another 3, taking our grand total of these giant wisps to 5. Either way, they are a welcome sight in a land where the darkness itself can kill you. Although, for a little bonus tidbit here, you can use the Stendarr's Aura spell as a light source to combat the dark here, despite its function as an anti-undead spell rather than a traditional light source. Now, once again, we have one for the rare item connoisseurs. At the end of this black book, we can find an altar. As anyone who's watched my How to Get Every Spell in Skyrim video will know, a copy of the Conjuration Master Spellbook Flame Thrall will be here. The only copy that spawns guaranteed in the open like this, I do believe. An incredibly valuable find indeed. Next up, we have the Black Book, The Winds of Change. This is one of the smallest areas contained in the Black Books, and as such, does have less to discover, but one thing did catch my eye. Here we can see a circle of 4 small pedestals surrounding a pool of tentacle-filled inky liquid. Now, if your conjuration is level 40 or higher, you can find the Conjure Seeker tome here, as you can in many other places in Apocrypha. But what stands out to me is the 5th pedestal off to the side, like it's in timeout. Atop it we find books of little to no consequence. My only conclusion here is that the pool in the center was not always there, as it, given the current configuration, is the only sensible place for this 5th pedestal to have been. An odd find, but that is all for this Black Book. Next up was supposed to be the book Untold Legends, but honestly there's not a lot going on there that really fits the criteria as far as I can tell. So now seems as good a time as any to bring up an interesting connection. Whilst exploring anywhere in Apocrypha, you will have surely seen, whether on the floor or in the air, loose pages, and if you've ever wondered what they say, I have no idea. But other than the Black Books themselves, this same writing can be found in one other place, on the Eye of Magnus. Perhaps these pages have something to do with the secrets of creation. We will likely never know, but it is surely an interesting find. Next up is the book Epistolary Acumen. During your exploration of this book's associated realm, you may come across a room rather different to any other we see in Apocrypha. We enter a large hall-like room with what appear to be lecterns of some kind lining the walls. A strange sight that prompts an obvious question. Who are these for? This room appears to be set up for humanoids to use to study in some way, but who? We certainly don't see any, and the humans we tend to hear about are never invited in groups for study sessions in the middle of Apocrypha. They usually just run around and go mad from the knowledge, possibly even becoming the denizens of this place. What this room is and why it is here is a question I would love to have answered. And finally is the book Filament and Filigree. Here we have something strange indeed. next to one of the containers that litter this realm, lies a scroll of invisibility. This might seem normal, but as far as I can tell, this is the only item in all of Apocrypha that spawns naturally on the ground, or the closest thing to ground here. Of course, there may be things I've missed, so correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a very odd thing to be the case. Still, small and unremarkable details are exactly what we're here for. Up first is something truly unremarkable. Atop a hill, standing proud and alone, we find one single, solitary tundra cotton plant. That's right, it's just a plant. But the reason this gets onto the list is that this is the only tundra cotton plant in Sovngarde. There are ample mountain flowers and trees and grasses, but just one of the lonely tundra cotton. But it being so alone here almost makes it seem like it was planted by someone, somehow. An interesting thought, but there's not much more to say here, so let's leave things as we found them. Speaking of unique things, next up we have these stone pillars, and atop them sit fire pits, or braziers, or whatever you'd like to call them, but they're not why we're here. No, we are here for the stone pillars themselves, because despite looking like every bit of stonework in every Nordic area, these are actually entirely unique to Sovngarde. On inspection, they appear to be almost a mix of Nordic or Admoran and giant craftsmanship, which would make some sense. Giants have been recorded working with Nords and possibly even being from Atmora themselves. But this is not the last unique thing we will find here. Alright, this next one had to come up at some point. I'm sure you all know this one, but there is a chance someone hasn't heard of this, and it is a classic. If you've been to Sovngarde at all, you will have noticed these giant hooded statues, almost reminiscent of the Greybeards, watching over Sovngarde from up high, just as the Greybeards themselves do from their keep on the throat of the world. But once you've walked past these statues, once you've turned your back, they will move too. These statues will constantly move to follow the player no matter where you are, but only when you're not looking at them. And of course, this is widely believed to be a reference to the Weeping Angels from Doctor Who. So, don't blink. But back to the more obscure now, we have a rather interesting line of dialogue. There is a character you can find in the Hall of Valor that, despite being labelled the same as all the other generic NPCs walking around, has this extra line of dialogue.
Hail, Dragonborn! That honor is also mine. To our shared birthright, you'll bring new glory.
He is also a Dragonborn. And we have no reason to believe this is untrue, as Sun himself says he has fought a Dragonborn before, which means there has to be one in here, and no one else is one, so we have no reason to doubt this man. Now, if you're wondering about the lore implications here, well, it's very surprising to find a random unnamed hero blessed by Akatosh himself, given that outside of the Septim bloodline, they're about as rare as a good live-action remake. But the question becomes, why the hell is he even here? He must have been chosen by Akatosh for something, but did he do it? And if he did do it, what the hell was it? Another mystery for the pile, it would seem. And finally, to end on a less godlike note, we have one more unique item. Gazing out over the lavishly decorated tables filled with good food and good mead, we can find some huge chunks of meat, parts of a roasted ox, a meal truly fit for a hero of Sovngarde. But one part stands above the rest, as, well, to be honest, kind of disgusting when you think about it, but it is also the only one of its kind in the entire game. The legendary roasted ox head. Unfortunately, you can't actually consume any parts of the ox, but it seems a fitting trophy to remind ourselves of our time here. After all, you can't go back. Well, Not until you die. First off, we are headed all the way back to the Rift. And of course, we could be here for nothing other than a skeleton. Now, quite clearly, this poor fellow was killed and consumed by this bear, but the location is what's interesting. This is a shrine of Zenithar, the Aedric god of commerce, the Aedric crypto bro, if you will. And presumably, this poor soul was one of his followers. The tower we find ourselves in is falling to rubble, and as such, the shrine is in a very poor state. You'd think a devotee of Zenithar would keep a better maintained shrine, but this, coupled with the fact that this person appears to have no belongings, would lead me to believe that the bear didn't actually kill them. Perhaps the tower was besieged by bandits looking to take the spoils of Zenithar for themselves, though a coin purse left on the table makes that unlikely too. Maybe this was just a really strong bear. Perhaps we should retreat carefully. And now for Falkreath. This is a very hidden one. Moving into the woods, we notice the ground beneath our feet becoming treacherous and cracked, small gorges in the earth. And it is in one of these gorges, tucked away right at the back, that we can find a single solitary helmet. There is no reason for this to be here. There is no body or camp nearby. It simply is. No explanation whatsoever. There's not much more to say on the matter, but it is most curious indeed. Whiterun, a fan favourite, of course, and speaking of fan favourites, we have, of course, a skeleton. This poor soul was left clutching at the last of their possessions, that which they held most dear, presumably. A strongbox. Now, for us it just contains loot appropriate for our level, but I'm sure it held a very special place in this person's heart. But what could have possibly killed them? Well, given their lack of flesh and remaining valuables, I would have to assume they lost their life to one of the ferocious predators around here. And the big saber cat is a solid clue too. Next up is the pail, and I actually remember purposefully not including this one in that video because I wanted to save it for something like this, so good job me. Here we find a shrine of Mara. Whilst this would seem to hold no real significance, and well, it really doesn't, it's where it is that makes it interesting, being situated between the borders of the Pale, Whiterun, and Hjaalmarch. Whoever put this shrine here was clearly trying to send a message of love. Given the Civil War, I'm not so sure it worked. Next we have the Reach, and this one is very odd. We can come across two horses. Clearly these horses are owned. There's a post nearby to tie them up, though unused, and they are both saddled. Hi, editing Snowfall here. You may have noticed these horses are clearly in a Stormcloak camp. But as it turns out, if you come here before any of the Civil War stuff, they're still here. I didn't realize that at the time, but the more you know. So, yeah, that's another odd discovery. But anyway, back to the video. But that isn't even what's weird. What's weird is with the amount of skeletons and bodies we found during this series, why aren't there even more of these? Next up is Eastmarch, with another puzzling one. We find a shrine of Akatosh, tucked away in the hills. Fairly normal so far, but upon approach, we will be met with a trifecta of skeleton attackers rising from the dead. But why? What are they doing here? There's no necromancers here or necromancer-related items. In fact, there's an alteration skill book of all things. Was this a trap laid for priests or some kind of defense system? And what is it all for? Another mystery we may never have an answer to. Hjaalmarch next, and we're back to skeletons and bears. As we scale this peak, we come across the aforementioned bear, and just past it, we will find the bloodied remains of a fresh kill. Two fresh kills, it would seem. And interestingly, a coin purse.
Presumably it was tangled in the bones and insides of one of the unfortunate souls, but regardless, at least we walk away with something for our efforts spent making the trip up here. Now for Haafingar, we have something I'm sure you will have all seen, but perhaps never really thought about. If we head to the capital of Solitude and take a look over by the markets at the well, we will notice a fishing pole, placed as if fishing into the well itself. But why? It's a well. There's no fish in it. Was someone attempting to reclaim a lost item, or perhaps even steal the valuables thrown in there as wish offerings? It's possible, but once again, we will never know for sure. Alright, Winterhold. And yes, fine, I'll include it. Maybe someone out there doesn't know this one. We can find, half encased in ice, a mammoth. And this mammoth has been impaled by none other than dwarven ballista bolts and arrows. And a random axe that just scales with level, so don't worry about that one. But yes, it would seem, based on this information, and by extension, the mammoth bones littering the ground nearby, the dwarves did in fact hunt mammoths. It makes a lot of sense that they would, but confirmation is always nice. Hi, editing Snowfall back once again. I didn't make a mistake this time, but between the events of recording the audio and then deciding to go actually get footage, this one kind of despawned, and I can't get it back. So normally there's like a dude with a chest for a chest, like instead of his ribcage, the chest is the chest is still there, so that's something. But yeah, he's gone, but he is normally here. Anyway, I'll let the video continue now. Now for the Forgotten Vale, and I find that I don't think I covered last time, but as of writing the script, I am quite frankly far too lazy to check. Anyway, ducking under the frigid waters, we can come across a skeleton with a rather odd chest. It's a chest. Its chest is a chest. There's really nothing else to say. It's just fantastic. And now we delve down into the ruins of Blackreach, and this time we're actually going to be looking at an interior, which I don't think I even considered in the Blackreach video. But this is an odd one indeed. We enter a room which, aside from the gnome root and some crockery, seems to be relatively empty, aside from the stone chair at the opposite end, upon which sits a skillbook, a block skillbook to be precise, which means, well, it means Bethesda doesn't consider lore when they place loot, as we know, but within universe, it must mean that someone came down and placed this here for some reason. But regardless, when one goes to sit upon the chair the book rests on, a trap is sprung. A spinning dwarven blade trap activates. But why? What function could this possibly serve? A prison? Seems unlikely. A torture chamber? Also seems unlikely given the other decor in the room. Perhaps it was just some kind of experiment. The Dwemer did love those after all. Ah, Solstheim, a land of dark curses, ash, magic, and fire, and dragons. And we're not going to be looking at any of that. We shall be turning our attention to a chest. Now, you may have noticed something different about it. It is, of course, absolutely riddled with spears from Reiklings. Why? Well, luckily, there is a simple answer to this one. It's because the chest is locked, which has clearly led to some ire from our short blue friends. Still, more for us. Ah, the Soul Cairn, my least favourite place to record anything. Now, here we have something a little different, and again, something many of you are likely familiar with, but it is also very easy to miss. Scattered around the Soul Cairn, you can find these tall lightning rods. But what you may not have known is that these lightning rods can be used. If you approach with an empty soul gem in your inventory and interact with the soul gem holder, the rod will be buffeted with lightning and retract, and the soul gem will be converted into a black soul gem. But this action can only be performed once per lightning rod. And now back to the plains of Apocrypha. If you saw the original video, you'll remember the giant wisp lanterns. Well, there is one other giant entity out in the inky waters of the Black Book, Waking Dreams. Heading out far enough, further than you can feasibly get normally, is a gigantic tentacle. Dwarfing the player character, it stretches high into the sickly green sky as it slithers. But we best move on quickly before the inevitable barrage of inappropriate jokes. And finally, we return to Sovngarde. Now, Sovngarde is quite small, as you may have noticed, so there isn't a whole lot, but there is at least one more thing to mention. If we turn our attention to the sky, we can see the warrior, mage, and thief signs found in our level up menu. A small detail to be sure, but a very cool one if you've never noticed it before. And that is it, the end of an era. Everywhere we have gone through. Of course, the content doesn't stop here, so if you've enjoyed, then be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.